I'm here with somebody whose work I enormously admire. It's an absolute treat and pleasure, and I think also appropriate that he's the ultimate game changer session here at the Edinburgh Festival. I'm with Howard Gordon. Welcome, Howard.
Thank you, Peter.
I'm going to show the show really in a couple of minutes, but first of all, just say a couple of things. He's not been in Edinburgh for 20 years, so be nice to him. He's been here last time for X-Files, one of the first of his, enormously successful programs. He's won lots and lots of awards. He's through Homeland and 24, I think, changed the face of contemporary and particularly kind of contemporary political thrillers. With some extraordinary pieces. Today's going to talk about his successes, but also the things that didn't work quite so well, because we all have those. I don't want to mention mine, but we all have those, and it's just interesting to talk about the learnings from his extraordinary career. So many ratings records, so many awards, lots of extraordinary careers established, including your own. Great collaborations with lots and lots of extraordinary people we're going to talk about, not just Alex Ganzer, other writers you've worked with, but you didn't start out as a guy who was obviously going to work in the movie business or the TV business. Right. It was a kind of more suburban beginning,
background.
Wasn't it? Yeah. So how did you just talk a little bit about those early years and how you then made how you made the connection? What was it that sparked the interest?
First of all, I apologize in advance for I lost my voice last night, this morning, and so
that's a story. You can ask a question on the app about.
So
that.
I'll be sipping frequently, and definitely note to self not to schedule be the last session of and say no to those last 4 whiskeys. I think is really more important. But I came. I'm from Long Island, from New York, and from, as you said, a pretty suburban background where no one. When it was a writer, I was an avid reader. I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know that one really could become a writer. And particularly, I wanted to write television. I didn't want to write movies. That was not my fantasy. I didn't want to write novels. I wanted to write television. I had this very early, deep connection to the medium.
And you saw a book, didn't you? You saw a book as well at some point. There's a book you saw and you thought.
Well, I did. I thought the idea of someone publishing a book was remarkable. Now I don't know anyone who hasn't, but Dr. Mendelsohn was actually a math professor who was a neighbor of mine at a local community college, and he had, I think, a book about zero, and it was on my bookshelf, and I was practically worshipful about this name on the spine of a book.
Yeah.
But
and what were you watching? What were you watching in there?
Well, I mean, pretty much everything. I mean, I had a really diverse set of tastes. But I was, Star Trek to Mary Tyler Moore to All in the Family, but the things that really got to me were, Roots. I remember sort of seminally, and Rich Man, Poor Man. These sort of the miniseries, and Brian's Song. I don't know how many people remember that, but
so a mix of sort of escapism. Social.
It was always. I had an emotional connection to these characters, and which I think is the idea of television. That I think, in some ways, it was, I'm sure, a reflection about whatever repression, whatever things I was going through as a person. I saw reflected. TV was my teacher, my best friend, and I never thought of it as anything but something that was a great medium. And I know there was always this.
You mean
weird
not a career?
Well, it was like, but even the second cousin of movies. Like, I remember even having this conversation with Brian Grazer, saying, "Well, what's kind of provoking him because I knew what his answer was." But I said, "What's a better medium?" Movies are, and it's a stupid question.
Wow. We can return to that. Yeah.
The answer is television, by the way.
Yeah. We think we know the answer. You've answered it. The thing also then is because the rest of the family are kind of doctors and there's a lot of that profession.
I will digress from the question every single time. So pull me right back. So I come from my brothers and their wives are all doctors, and I assumed I would be a doctor until I graduated I went to Princeton, where I actually was with Alex there.
And was that meeting with Alex Ganzer, your long-time collaborator, was that a seminal relationship meeting? Because clearly the spark between you has been extraordinary.
It has been. I mean, we became, we forged our relationship over Sol Bello. We had this, both of us were kind of outsiders. We both played, actually I played soccer at school, and Alex played soccer. He was injured in the first week of training camp. I lasted 2 years, a year, then mostly sat, and then took up, believe it or not, ballet and became a ballet dancer.
No.
That's not on
That's
that.
not in the notes. Yeah.
I dropped out of school. That's another story. But so so the point is that, and Alex also dropped out of school at a different time. We didn't meet till our senior year, after which he'd climbed mountains and traveled the world, and I had a scholarship to a ballet company, and so I started as an athlete and kind of student politician to loner and weird dancer, and then came back.
So last night was not about weird dancing, by the way. It was a business dinner.
But I was always a writer. But all the time I was writing, and all the time Alex was writing. We both were doing creative theses.
And you were writing to get.
No, we never met. And somebody said because I was a Saul Bellow fanatic. Okay. I read everything. Had dog-eared his, and Alex had done the same. So we both had these Saul Bellow collections and worshipped this writer. We met so it was like literally a blind date, and both of us were kind of competitive and kind of, it's like we're kind of, we just forged this love of it. We love the same writers and
still competitive.
It doesn't matter quite as much anymore. Yeah. But
not so much.
That's a whole nother session. Okay. Partnerships.
And the other
writing partnerships is a very interesting thing.
The other thing, well, it is. Sorry, no, it is interesting. I mean, I want to talk about that because it's kind of a pretty rare thing.
But
for it to work that way.
Well, it is, and honestly, TV is one thing. It is a collaborative medium, and I think I think playing team sports and also having had a collaborator in those early formative years.
Does playing team sports help with things like writers' rooms and that?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Very much so.
So that's it. There's the first thing, isn't it? Get into team sports, form a writers' room, work on the same principles. So, we'll talk about how you captain a good writers' room at some point. We'll talk about that. I want to ask a little bit about the other.
I didn't finish your story. I didn't finish the story.
Sorry, go on. Excuse me. Was there more on top of the ballet dancer thing?
No. I digress out of the story. But then I didn't. I graduated. Hadn't taken organic chemistry.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to be a doctor. I signed up for the LSATs, which is I thought maybe I'll be a lawyer.
Yeah.
I slept through that one. So I boxed myself into a corner and left myself no choice except to do the thing I wanted to do. But I needed to kind of eliminate the other stuff.
Yeah, and the thing I was coming to is that then the other path you might have taken, because you were interested in the State Department, in diplomacy, in world affairs, because that's so interesting when you look at your work.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually went to Princeton for the Woodrow Wilson. Again, I guess the part of being that young is you can try on a lot of things. And at that point, I thought I'd go to the Woodrow Wilson School at some point. Yeah. And I took the State Department. I didn't take it. I downloaded whatever I got my hands on the copy of the State Department test. And I wasn't smart enough to even think about doing that. So I put that aside. Again, it was just another thing. I don't think I was that serious about it, but it's
quite a telling.
Well, I've always been very, very interested in foreign affairs and international relations and the history of nations and in America.
America's part in all that.
Very much so.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. And then writing with Alex and the relationship and the move to the West Coast, where a lot of this stuff. A lot of the rest of your career takes place. Talk about that transition, because you did some interesting stuff in the early years there, didn't you, as well? So Alex and I we're kind of he actually also slept through his LSAT. I mean, we have so many things both of us really had to back, because it was not a proper, there wasn't a proper professional thing to do to be a television writer from where he comes from as well. And both of us were going to get our master's creative writing degrees. I was going to go to NYU and Alex to Stanford. We both won fellowships respectively after we wrote our senior theses, which were novels. Yeah. And one night I said, Alex, I know this sounds crazy, but I have this great idea for what I think is a miniseries. And I think it's great, and it was, and I think we should go to Hollywood and write it. And it was the life of Lord Byron. Oh yeah, of course.
And I mean, he thought it was a great idea too, but we were the only two people who thought it was a great idea.
The only two Americans, yeah. That is
an extraordinary. But he was a rock star now,
You've got to get back to that one. We know that.
Okay.
We'll talk about it. What I mean is you've got to go back to that.
Oh, to Byron. Now maybe someone will be interested. But he has to be a vampire.
The UK. Yeah, the vampire. The vampire Lord Byron. By the way, that's our pitch. We've got that pitch together. The vampire Lord Byron. That's brilliant. And because you did some crazy, interesting, speculative stuff then to get into the business too, didn't you? You wrote a script. You sent a script in. You did a bit of.
So we did. So when Byron went by the wayside, we wound up writing what's called a spec script. I mean, and it was and in those days, I'd never taken a film class or a television class. I had no formal training except for the thousands and tens of thousands of hours I spent watching. Yeah. But Alex, who was not a TV watcher, we gave him a crash course, and we deconstructed Saint Elsewhere was on at that point, and we wrote a spec script, and that's what our sample was. And together we started a company tutoring the privileged kids in Los Angeles.
And you made some interesting contacts.
Well, our first class, so basically the entire Harvard Lampoon Mafia, who are all now on in the Simpsons and King of the Hill and Conan and Greg Daniels and John Mostow and Alec Ashishian, all these people who were out like Alex and me, who are out in LA trying their luck as writers. I hired them as teachers, and had I opened an agency then, I might have been
a stake in that
fabulously.
Because then a whole raft of things happen, from that moment on. Buffy, Angels, X-Files, a whole bunch of interesting things happen where you're doing a whole range of stuff that is of a genre. And you're working in teams, and I presume you're trying to find your voice. There's a lot of stuff there where you're working, you're doing things, but you're looking for the voice.
Well, voice. I say voice is a really it's a really relevant question because when you think about it, being a writer is by definition, you have the temerity to say I have something that's worth people's attention or a story worth telling. And there's a kind of a paradox when you're on a television staff, particularly when you're staffing on someone else's show. How do you join? By definition, you're sublimating your voice, or your voice is hopefully complementary to somebody's. It's like the tonic chord of a note. How do you find another way, a few more notes to play inside that same chord and consistent with that person's vision? And hopefully, it's expansive. It's greater than the sum of its parts. But and I learned to be a team player. I was never in a great hurry to create my own thing. I always was turned on by the material, and in a very, I'm sure, hubristic way, owned it. Like I thought when I was on Beauty, I did Beauty and the Beast, and I had no authorship except my own, and I found it very interesting that there's this asymmetrical credit given to the showrunners when I think at its best these shows are team efforts.
And just want to talk about, in fact, Peter Rice asked me to mention this, but you were then in an incredible writers' room. The X-Files writers' room was an extraordinary academy of talent. We just talk a little bit about that. Then we'll talk about the dynamics.
I also was on, I have to say, before that I was on a show called Beauty and the Beast with Ron Perlman and Linda Hamilton in the 80s, where I really kind of cut my teeth. I became a producer on that one, and Alex and I wrote about a third of those, and again felt, even though we were lower level staff writers, but we had George R. Martin, who's still a dear friend, was in the room, so that was a pretty good writers' room. But on X-Files, it was this show on, at the time, a network that I think was kind of on the balls of its ass. I think. I mean, as I recall, it was still kind of proving itself. I think The Simpsons hadn't quite. What's the archive? Is that right on that time? Do you know, Peter?
Simpsons would have been before. Yes.
Just before. So, but it was also a Friday night show, which traditionally was not a great time. It was about aliens, and I know my agent said, "What are you doing going on the show?" But it was. It was the
first hit drama.
Was it really? Yeah. And again, you saw it, and it was something, the alchemy, the DNA of that show, of these two characters, of a premise that didn't feel like it, it was not the first time the skeptic and the believer had been put together, but whatever unique alchemy makes these things great. We felt it was great, and
why was that writers' room? I mean, we know now the talent.
Well, it was.
Why was it so?
Well, Chris Carter created the show and again did a wonderful job, but also had a limited bibliography himself, and he hired. He'd read actually a pilot that Alex and I had shot, but hadn't gotten picked up. That was very similar to one he'd pitched, and he admired it, called us, and asked us to come on the show, and Jim and Glenn, Morgan and Wong were on that first batch, and so that was another example of really the healthy competition and cooperation. It's where that was a show where everybody really kind of tried to outdo each other. Everyone had their own voice, and Glenn and Jim kind of taught us all. They had this tremendous filmography with B movies, and the way they sort of reconstituted them and put it through the prism of that show. Yeah. And it was, when you really think about it, Vince Gilligan came on, and Vince was somebody who, I think 10 people take credit for having hired Vince. I'll take it here. But my memory is having gone to a friend who was an agent at ICM and said, who's a hot writer and who's great? And I read these two scripts. Vince had sold them for $1 million each, so someone else. But as a TV, he was in Virginia though, hacking away at his third spec script, and that was in the third season. He did one, and the rest is history. But then there was Darren Morgan, Jim's brother, who wrote what I think is one of the best episodes of not just X-Files, but of television, Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose. If you haven't seen it, or if you've seen it, rewatch it.
It's been brilliant, by the way. I was meant to be having a summer holiday, but I was watching lots of old X-Files in preparation for. I realised how good some of those. I mean, I was like the best Doctor Who's or whatever it might be, and they're just.
I'm somebody who tends not to rewatch anything, but I was on an airplane and I saw the best of X-Files, and I just saw a few of mine, and I tuned into one, and it was really I had PTSD from it. I mean, I admired it. I said that was pretty good, but I remembered every Sunday,
and it was the mixture of sort of entertainment and politics, and there's a kind of sense the world's getting more serious in there. I mean, the world.
Well, once the show got successful too, we were able to push things, and I mean, again, the show was really done on a I mean, when you think about it, I think it was $1 million. It was $1 million. 50 that first year. Now it was Canada, and it was also 20-something years ago. But but it was the show clearly was something that had even Sandy Grusha, who was running the network at the time. It was kind of just, I think, a programmer for him. And there was another show called The Adventures of Briscoe County, which I think all the money and all the promotion went into.
It is, yeah.
And Sandy famously said, "I'll eat my hat if this show," meaning Briscoe County, is not the next hit. And at next, remember that? Mark is smiling. Next year at the upfronts, after X-Files had taken off and Briscoe County hadn't, David said, "Do you want some salt with your hat?"
And I just pursue the kind of writer room thing, because there is it's been a theme of, I think, of these sessions, these game-changing sessions, particularly with big American execs and writers, has been the good and bad of the writers' room, and because you've got not a checkered experience, but you've got strong views about when they work and when they don't work and get in the way.
Right. Yeah. No, we were talking about that. I think it's one of those things that has been fetishized a little bit by writers and producers abroad, about this mystical writers' room that always functions beautifully, and all. It really doesn't. And there are writers' rooms that are absolutely wastes of time and of money. Yeah. And it's like curating. You have to. It's like being in a band, or again recruiting a team. Who's going to be able to sing in this key? And essentially, it's who's going to be able to ask the same questions. How do you take, by definition, writers who are strange, idiosyncratic people determined to tell their own stories, and how do you corral these very strong people and communicate a vision, a creative vision, and a conversation, and tell one story and participate in, and so it becomes a really you find yourself really becoming a diplomat and kind of a prime minister, not a dictator. Or maybe a prime minister with dictatorial veto power.
Captain of the team.
It's captain of the team, yeah. But it doesn't. But sometimes it just doesn't work. Yeah. And in the case of Homeland, and for that matter, in 24, eventually, many of them are actually still on Homeland now. We're a group of writers who were curated, but there were a lot of casualties along the way. A lot of people sort of left. Didn't work out. Most people don't work out. What people don't understand, and it costs money. Yeah. And so this whole idea of a writer's room, I think, is, if not overrated, is something to be taken with a grain of salt.
And you admired, just to finish off on a Vince Gilligan theme, because you admired the way Vince Gilligan ran his writer's room, I think, and brought on
Vince did it
in Breaking Bad.
Right. Well, in Breaking Bad, Vince had the patience. There are writers who, someone was telling me, I don't know if it was, somebody was telling me about a British writer who tried this with a writer's room and just in the end just threw up his hands and said, "I'll do it." And you find yourself having to, you have to exercise some restraint and put in the time early with writers, and it requires patience and also even wasting time. You have to take a step back or a step to the side before you take a step forward. Yeah. And Vince really put in the time with frankly, younger writers who were willing to put in the time and willing to put in the effort and willing to really sing in Vince's glorious key. He's just such a brilliant writer. I mean, I would say I've had the privilege of working, have a front row seat with only a couple of people I'd really call geniuses, and Vince is one of them. And you know, to me, a genius is somebody you hear a line, you know it's Beethoven. You see it, you know it's Rothko or something, you know it's Picasso. And if you cover up a script and you read it, you know it's Vince. And I would say Joss Whedon is the second person. Again, there are lots of geniuses, I'm saying, the people I've had the pleasure of working with.
Okay. And we might ask questions about, come back to writers' rooms and showrooms at the end if there's some questions from the audience. But I just want to kind of move on now to the big hits, the content itself, because I think any show, I think of the last 20 years, that's been a game changer. It's 24 for me. It really stands out. Just kind of changed the world of drama. But just interesting in that kind of success failure thing. You know, you were writing spec scripts and pilots and doing all sorts of things, and the booking on channel on 24 didn't come about as it were necessarily kind of by design. Did it? Came out of there was kind of happy accident there too.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing a pilot at the time that was, again, the pilot like Briscoe. It was the Briscoe County of 2000,
yeah.
Which was called Ball and Chain. And Gail, it was a comic book, and it was it was about a married couple who get superpowers that only work. They're about to get divorced, and it only works when they're together.
Wow.
There's a big bolt of lightning from across the sort of cosmos, and there's an earthquake at the last moment, and the anointed hero, who's been studying 3,000 alien languages, it misses him, and it hits this couple. And it was
quirky.
It was quirky, it was expensive, and it didn't work. But it was it was an investment because it was a good idea, and I think there was also the understanding that it would get there. And so my understanding was it was going. I was packing my bags for the upfronts, and I got a call from Dana Walden who said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm buying a birthday gift for my, at that point, 8-year-old son, and or 9-year-old." And I said, "I'm going to New York." And she says, "No, you're not. Gail's not picking up the show. She's picking up another show, 24, and she wants you to be on it." And Joel Sterno and Bob Cochran had created this show, 24, and the body was not even buried, and she said, "I want you to," and I kind of felt like
there was no mourning. There was no bereavement period.
No, there was none. It was meet them at Starbucks because they're going before their flight to New York, and it was kind of a shotgun marriage that was wary on all sides, and I felt a bit like a platoon rat, but you know.
Did it? And I presume when you first encountered 24, the idea, that you then crystallised so wonderfully. The fact it is this intensely formatted, intensely serialised. I mean, did you look at it and think, oh my God, the problems and complications with it?
Well, I hadn't had the same feeling about a show, a pilot, since I'd seen X-Files. I watched it that night, and I called Gail and I said, "You made the right call. This is fucking great." Yeah. It was so good, and it was impossible at that moment to know. And the same with X-Files. I have to say, when you watch X-Files and you think about what it became and what it was, and at some level there's a tremendous act of faith with television. You can't possibly know the end. Yeah. So how many times can Scully get knocked out just before the alien comes, and call it, and so when you think about it, that can't possibly go for 10 years now, can it? And how many bad days can Jack Bauer have? And I think none of us thought this was going to be a long-running thing. And
he only ever had bad days, Jack Bauer, by the way.
He did, and he had 9 very, very, very bad days.
And in Jack Bauer, by the way, just sorry, there's so many things I could just talk to for an hour on 24, being such a big fan. But in Jack Bauer, I think we were talking in preparation for this at some point about other heroes of their time or their situation. We were talking about kind of James Bond and Jack Bauer. We're talking about British Empire, the American Empire, moments in time. We just talk a little bit about that because I just thought it was. Well,
yeah, I mean, we were talking about why Jack resonated, and I think in a way James Bond, when you look at it, and this is not my thesis, it's somebody else's, so I'm quoting someone, but that James Bond's rise came about in the wake of the post-war the sort of last shutter of the empire. And here was this guy who made a mean martini, had the license to kill, and bedded everyone he saw. And in that, there was something about there's something aspirational in that fantasy. And I think Jack Bauer, in a much darker way, he was born before 9/11. But was viewed through 9/11. I think we thought perhaps the show was going to be canceled, because who would want to
at that point?
We thought, and in fact,
it
was kind of
too difficult,
too dark, and just too close to home. In fact, in the pilot, which had not aired yet.
So just to explain the chronology there.
Oh, it was about, we were shooting episode 5 when 9/11 happened, and we hadn't aired. We were still 2 months away from air, and. In fact, there were scenes where there was a plane that explodes. We had to trim them just for taste level, and it turned out that the audience was, I think the show was just a very, very good show and worked on so many levels, and again, got lucky in all the ways the show needs to get lucky to work, from the cast, from Kiefer. I mean, some people were lobbying for Jeff Goldblum, so imagine for a moment that. And seriously, this was not, and who knew even then that Kiefer would take this part and make it the part.
And so a hero for the times was.
And I think it was
dangerous, difficult, volatile times.
But it was also a time when we felt, and America felt too, and I think still does, and these are still questions we're asking, which is that the bad guys aren't just the people who are trying to hurt us, but the bureaucracy, the failure of intelligence, and so Jack had this very American, go it alone, get it done thing, very much in the tradition. Jack is not a reinvented hero. He's a guy who gets shit done, like Clint Eastwood did, like Stallone did, like Bruce Willis did, with a little more irony.
Is it ever too soon to fictionalize, to be that close? Were there moments where it became too hot?
Apparently not, because I think
because the rating.
People wanted to see it, and people had been watching.
Because Series 2 it got more political. In fact, he became a counter-terrorist, and the ratings.
Well, we've always had a very weird dance, both on 24 and on Homeland, and less obviously on Tyrant, but with the real world, and Jack, who was this aspirational, kick-ass. A man, honestly, who I related to very deeply. That's what my into that show was a guy who was married, who was really trying who worked, whose job kind of threatened his marriage at times because of the work and his commitment. But in year 4, current events kind of eclipsed and made Jack a much rougher character, and inside, Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo and the failed invasions. I mean, not the failed, but the challenged invasions.
Guantanamo Bay.
Right. Suddenly, Jack is now the poster child for torture and.
So we talk a little about the pressure on. Responding to that, because it became, those were. There was quite a lot of politics around the series.
Yeah, well, and there was a
criticism and which side are you on, and a bit of all of that stuff that happens in times of.
And part of it was this odd conflation that was sort of, I think, trumpeted by a few journalists, that because it was a Fox show, somehow we were taking marching orders from Roger Ailes or something. I mean, it was really bizarre. I mean, people took these things, these dots, and connected dots that may have been factual, but actually were erroneous, and they connected them incorrectly. And the show had no agenda, and there were no talking points. And yet we were sort of the poster. Suddenly, Jack became this. We were taking marching orders from the White House, condoning torture. But in the end, and how I responded to it, no one wants to be called a racist or an Islamophobe and all that stuff, and it hurts. But I developed a pretty thick skin, because I know I'm not, and that's ultimately all that matters, and the other stuff goes away. And I would say ultimately I was very grateful that the show became, even if it became a political football, that it gave people an opportunity and a pretext to talk about what Islamophobia, what it means, and what we think about it, and how we're responding to our fear. And in a way, these questions are questions that I think ultimately got much more addressed in a more nuanced way on Homeland, and we've had that opportunity.
Let's just do the second, because I'm keen to open up to the room in a second as well, but there's lots I could talk about. Just to talk about the segue into Homeland, because Homeland it feels to me like it's born out of, it's not a response to that, but it's born out of clearly of that work, of that period, of those issues, of America searching for a new role in the world, a new response. Unlike 24, it was initially, I think, an adaptation as well.
Right. It was based very loosely on an Israeli series, Hatufim, which is really about two soldiers who were prisoners of war whose release was negotiated 17 years later, and they come home, and it really was a family. So it was a very different show. And Rick Rosen, who was my agent, called me. He represents Keshet, and said, I was on the last season of 24, and I said, I found your next show. And I said, yeah. I was half paying attention, and the show hadn't even been written.
You said you realised the schedules I'm on, But we'll talk about that in a second. I want to talk about the schedules. Just talk about that second.
Oh, that was it. So this was several months before 24 wrapped, and the show, if you see the Israeli version, it's not like The Office where you change, Chaim to
it's not a straight
Howard.
That's all.
So. What was the question again?
I was really talking about the transition how it came about.
Well, so I mean, really, on the last day, I was in a room not unlike this, on the soundstage, mixing the last episode. I picked. I read the pilot to Hatufim.
Yeah.
I decided to bring Alex, on with me and to write it and actually to run it, because I said I'm really tired after 9 years of 24, and we batted around some ideas about how we might adapt it.
And I just want to go back just a little bit to how tired you were, because just thinking about the schedules of 24, because the concept, the numbers of episodes, the schedule, just talk a little, because I think it's just interesting for those of us who principally have worked in UK production, which it feels altogether more genteel than the kind of
24 episodes a year for 9 years or for 8 years is something I wouldn't envy. I mean, I feel like probably an athlete who sees film of himself getting hit, taking hits, and can't imagine doing that again. Yeah. But it was really
because you were kind of working from July to May, short break, week off. Getting the second series ready.
Yeah, I took 1 week off a year for that period of time. Except interrupted by the writer's strike. When I heard that we were on strike, I started crying. I broke down
with relief.
With relief. I just was like, I was so happy.
That's funny. That's funny.
I mean, because who was it? I don't know if it was it James Joyce who said it's a nightmare from which I cannot awaken, or I can't remember. Somebody said it. Does anyone know? I think, but that was what it was.
We'll Google that
in a good way. It's like a dream and a nightmare. You really feel the privilege of when you connect to an audience and you are telling a story and
you're riding that.
It is euphoric and it is corrosive all at once, and it doesn't stop. And the metaphor I use is that at the beginning of every season, there's this impossible hill that's almost sheer, and you're climbing it, and you get through it somehow. You fall, you slip, you bang yourself up, and you get to the top. Somehow, miraculously, you fall asleep and you wake up and you're at the bottom again.
Yeah.
I think.
That's terrifying.
Was it? I love these quotes because they speak. But Matthew Weiner said it's like winning. You get to be the winner of the cake eating contest. The prize is more cake.
So can I just talk about another hero now, because another hero of our times comes along. You create somebody completely different from Jack Bauer. Carrie Matheson, who, a polar opposite in every sense, and kind of amazing Claire Danes, I think. And you cast Damian Lewis, which I'd like to talk about in a second, because that was one of those bits of casting which was, in hindsight, he's kind of like perfect.
Yeah.
But at the time must have been. That
was absolutely the most challenging part to cast.
Getting
not just getting him, but knowing who.
Just explain the character.
Carrie.
They know, but
Carrie.
Carrie and
who she is, Carrie.
Just Carrie and Damian's part. Just the dynamic there. Just talk about why the casting was so.
Well, Alex and I, first of all, just to sort of continue the story of Homeland. So we wrote this thing in this summer. I literally wrapped, 24, and Alex and I met at Starbucks, not too far from the one I met Joel and Bob, and started talking about Homeland. And it started in that summer. We spent the next 4 months, 3 to 4 months writing it, and but also we had no idea, and truthfully, no idea that we kind of had to be interested ourselves in telling the story. And there were certain things we said: are people going to be interested in a story about terrorism? Nothing's happened on domestic soil. People kind of have this this fatigue. We know kind of we did. I certainly did after 9 years. Alex joined 24 in the 7th season. I corralled him. Alex said, I'm not a thriller writer. I don't do. And I said, Alex, you're coming. Yeah. And it was really out of friendship. I said, I miss you. We haven't spent enough time. At least come. We'll spend some time together. But we sat, we wrote it, and we said we knew we were fishing in a pond that was similar to 24. Yeah. It's a wildly different show,
it is.
And it was animated by questions at the beginning that were very different because it was 10 years on after 9. It wasn't after 9/11. It was 10 years later, and there were many, many more questions, and different questions that had to be asked and answered fictionally. But we knew that we had a character who ultimately is a CIA agent who is.
And you didn't know it was male or female at that.
No, very much so, and sort of kind of Carrie was created from Jack's rib. I mean, in many ways, it was like, how do we cut off at the pass any comparisons between the show? And so we just man, woman, older, middle-aged. Jack, remember, was a father of a 17-year-old, and she's a woman of a certain age. And in fact. When we wrote it, even then when we wrote it, David Nevins, I think, wanted us to go to Maria Bello and to Halle Berry, and we really said this character needs to be younger, not just to be not like Jack Bauer, but to be at a point in her life where she is underestimated by her peers.
Single, but with other
single
with
and
all
troubled,
these other troubled,
right, and even her bipolarity came only after the 17th draft.
Did it?
When we knew she was promiscuous, and we knew that she was gifted, but also and hyper-focused. And honestly, after the 17th draft, we realized, wait, she's not.
Yeah. Why? What is
why?
It?
And then suddenly we diagnosed her.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unbelievable how her behavior kind of.
Maybe that's your medical history of your family. Maybe that's all your family.
Right. I haven't done the doctor show yet. That would be
the doctor show. Okay, we'll come back to the doctor show. But so it's an altogether.
And Carrie, just to get back to Carrie. So in thinking about the character, we said Claire Danes had just done Temple Grandin for HBO, and so we said let's call the character Claire. So we just pictured Claire Danes for ourselves, someone who was smart enough and had that exquisite vulnerability, but toughness and so we just called her Claire for shorthand. And then we obviously, when we said, who do you want to cast? We said, well, we kind of thought about Claire Danes, and again, Rick said, well, she's represented here, let's send it to her. We changed, by the way, then we changed it from Claire to Carrie.
Yeah. And can we just talk about Damian Lewis as well, because I mean, as a piece of casting again, that was
really.
He's not American, and lots and lots of.
There were so many things that sort of required that. If you remember the first show, and Alex and I recognized the sort of narrative experiment that the show was. It was wherein the truth, which was the premise that was tested, which is the idea that this potentially unreliable witness, Carrie Mathison, has a hypothesis that this returning hero is actually a terrorist. And so this simultaneous possibilities of maintaining that thing and not knowing was the narrative exercise. And we saw through screens the ones that she illegally obtained and spied on him through the television, in which Damian is this public hero with a political career ahead of him. From the screen of Damian's own memory, is that a memory? Is memory reliable? And we, the audience, had to immerse ourselves and triangulate in that question, who and what, is right. And so consequently, Damian, who was kind of the cipher of this question, was the lightning rod, the person we're looking at. Well, if he is guilty and he comes home, would he be tortured and emaciated? In fact. Yeah. So all those questions sort of had to be, so many questions had to be answered. And he had to, and also, well, what does he look like? Does he look like Kyle Chandler, or does he look like something out of a Norman Rockwell? So there's a lot of disagreement among people.
So booking him, I presume, making that call, because it's a huge role, and it becomes even more complicated and important as their relationship develops. I mean, that must have been a booking you had to fight for.
It was a bit of a fight. It wasn't unanimous and clear, but it was unanimous between Alex and me. Alex had sent me. He called me up and he said, "I just watched this Lodge Carrigan film. I can't remember. It was he plays. Does anyone remember this? It was the first 30 minutes is just Damian. He's schizophrenic and he's looking for his son.
Indie. Was it UK Indie?
What is it called? Was it Keen? Yeah. And Damian was mesmerized. He held the camera looking for, and he was so clearly our choice.
Can you just talk a little bit about, just to talk a little about, we're going to open it up for questions, or either send them through on the iPad here, or let's just take some questions in a minute. But just want to talk about the role of America in all this, because this you're operating in territory, in kind of dangerous, controversial, topical stuff. And you're often venturing overseas, writing about places and things that American audiences are not seeing enormous amounts of, maybe outside the awful news, and you're dramatising and all sorts of things. But you've talked a bit about it being about America. It's about the rest of the world, but it's about this changing role. You're fiercely, I know, patriotic and care an awful lot about the country you come from, but these are troubled times. Just talk about what you're exploring.
If I said I was patriotic, I mean it but not in a sort of jingoistic.
No.
I am in a way where I recognize that the things that we have and the things that were sort of fought for by the people who came before us, kind of gives us a responsibility as citizens to ask certain questions. And I think the privilege of also doing this job, and certainly the thing that's sort of the animating question that makes it interesting for me to do it and to put in the kind of time, is to fictionally work through some of the questions of what are we afraid of, how should we be afraid, what should we do about it, and there are sort of questions that have no good answers, but I think getting to work through it fictionally through characters like Carrie, if it just makes you think a little differently about these things, and they're serious matters. I mean, we are in a very strange, living in like a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. We are definitely there.
I just can ask you, just an interesting question came up on all this. We could just talk about the big issues and the difficult subjects and politics with a small p. And somebody just sent through a little question that said, "Does drama?" It's interesting. Just I understand the role of America in the military world, intelligence, security. Terror, all sorts of things. Somebody just sent a question here that said, does drama have a role to play in big issues like climate change? Could you see, are there issues like
that's a fantastic question. And actually, I had this conversation with James Murdoch, who actually about this very thing. And the thing, I'm actually, my wife is actually an environmentalist, and so. What's challenging there, unlike, for instance,
that might have been from your wife, I think.
It might have been.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, the geologic time of climate change is so different. Whereas, you can tell a story about a gay relationship, and it's very exquisitely human and very obviously human, and it suggests. So there are certain things. Islamophobia. There are characters and players inside that question. And when I say Islamophobia, I mean what does that look like? What does it mean to be Muslim in America is a much easier question to dramatize or problem to address fictionally than climate change, where what does that look like? I don't know. I mean, maybe a face-off between Ed Begley and I mean, who? But
you're not. The thing is, you're not done with issues.
Well,
I mean, because you might get to a point here in your career where you go, you know what, I've done the issues, but I want to go back to create. Aliens in outer space.
Well, I'll tell you something. Having been challenged by certain constituencies and advocacy groups, and being called a torture monger and an Islamophobe and a racist, has made me miss writing about vampires and aliens. And so maybe it is time for Byron, the Vampire Slayer.
Though sometimes the great thing about that world, of course, is that with the free pass you get into the sci-fi world, you can explore these issues, but in a different.
And you will not be threatened or castigated. Yes, I think that's a wise. Thing.
Might be a wise next move. Yeah. But no, don't do it just yet, because I also just want to talk, because it's the latest thing you're doing now. You're doing lots of things. I could. Sorry, we're going to run out of time if I'm not careful. But we've got Tyrant, which is. I don't think I'm going to have time to talk about Tyrant, which is a shame, because I'd love to spend more time. Maybe somebody in the audience will ask about Tyrant. But I want to talk about 24 Legacy, because you're doing 24 without Keith and without Jag. Though tantalised a little bit, he might pop in somewhere in the mix. We just talked a little bit about the perils of returning to big stuff and big important stuff that we all care about, we're all watching intently, the pressure, or maybe there's no pressure of doing that.
Well,
it seems to me taking a central character out, as it were, at this point. And
well, 24 was one of those questions. Like there is, and the genesis was very organic. The idea of real time, which is so 24 really is this wonderful invention that Joel Cerno and Bob Cochran came up with, and the milieu of counterterrorism. So appropriate, and so real time. I mean, Aristotle said all drama should be in real time, and so we kind of own that format. Yeah. We also had Jack Kiefer Sutherland, who defined one of the great parts in television, and so there was a strange existential question: Is 24? Is it Jack Bauer? Is it real time? I feel like once we told this last story, I would have sworn and put my last dollar on that after that 8th season. And a TV movie in there, that was it. You would never hear from 24. Even though we tried to develop a few movies, I kind of knew secretly that's not what the show is. 4 years later, I was having dinner with Kiefer, and I really missed the character. Yeah. He kind of missed it. We kind of danced around it, and we sold the show the next day. Yeah. I've never made a sale more easily. I walked into Dana and Gary's office.
Together?
No, I was just truly talking about, and she said, that's a good idea. Let's go to Kevin. I said, I'm not sure I really have the idea formulated. She goes, let's just talk about it. And they ordered it that afternoon. Yeah. And then I said, wait, so we got the band back, and Evan Katz and Manny Cotto, who were also from, at that point where I knew they were finishing up their runs, and they ran the show for that run. But it was only after that particular exercise that we really felt that Jack Bauer had run his course as the center of the real-time franchise. Yeah. And it wasn't until we found another idea. It wasn't a callow, this is a great brand, this is a great franchise, here's a gun to your head. Dana and Gary were very, very, we only came to them when we had an idea. And Evan and Manny had actually another idea that really worked well in the 24, a sketch of an idea and the character. Again, who we understand we had to cast and create a character who is very much not Jack Bauer.
Yeah. So new hero, 12 episodes?
12 episodes, although still over 24.
Yeah. And you just talk just briefly, and then we'll open this up, about you're doing something on VR. I think what's also fascinating, you're doing a VR launch or a VR segment. You're working on that now.
Yeah, I wrote it. I finished it. We're shooting it. If we can make the deals, but we will. We're supposed to shoot it next week. And Samsung, who's a partner in 24, there'll be product integration and a media buy, and they have a deal with Fox. And one of their initiatives is the VR. They have what's their, I can't remember their brand. It's Samsung VR. Yeah. Anyway, I'm writing, working with a 7-8 minute prequel. There was a raid of a compound of our our hero was party to. He was part of a SEAL team, and that raid is being done in a virtual reality sort of featurette.
Have you had to write and rewrite that because you want?
Well, I was really interested. I did it kind of as a point of curiosity, like what does that medium look like, and how might we do it? And we have VR professionals. There's a studio that I think Vox has an association with, and I steeped myself in it, and I'm really enjoying it. I'll be really curious to see how it comes out.
Yeah, you're learning too, and it may well debut during the Super Bowl.
Well, I think the idea is, and if it all comes together, it'll air. It'll be shown kind of at the retail level at the Super Bowl itself, and at the Samsung headquarters and whatever other kiosks and malls they choose to
from all good stockists. Now, I've got a few questions in, but I just thought we'd have a look at the room and take some hands. We've got one down here, thanks. Anybody else stick their hand? I've got a couple of mics in the room, but let's just take this question here. Thank you, Howard. We've got about 8 minutes left.
I can hear you.
There you go. Here it is. Pass the mic. It's a new game. Say hello to people.
Hi, my name's Connor, and before I talk to my question, I just want to say, Howard, one of my favourite shows of all time is Angel, the Buffy's Vampire Slayer spin-off, and you wrote an episode in the first season called Hero, which killed off a major character very, very early on. And I just wanted to say that I really, really enjoyed that episode, and I thought it was quite an emotional ending. I know it's a bit of, but it's
we should talk about killing heroes off at some point, and favourite characters maybe, because you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, we've killed a few in our time.
Yeah. talked about showrunners briefly. I mean, in your early career, you worked with a number of major showrunners: Chris Carter for The X-Files, Joss Whedon for Buffy, and David Greenwalt for Angel. So I wanted to ask you a bit about what you learned from those showrunners when you later went on to showrun yourself for 24 and Homeland.
You know, well, the definition, my favorite definition of a showrunner, and I'll quote myself here, is that you take all the credit and you get all the blame. So once you assume that you're sitting in that chair, what did I learn? Well, I learned. I'll tell you. Somebody asked me what I'm most proud of in this job, and I said I think I'm most proud of is this job has forced me and taught me how to be a better listener, and navigating. I was at Peter and Brian Singer's talk yesterday, and you talked about the collaborative process between an executive and the talent, but it's the same thing when you are. It kind of goes back to my first thing that I said, is that when you're working with writers, all of whom have visions and voices, and expressing how to not just sing in your own key, to be open to those voices. And there are some people who cannot hear anything but, or cannot like constitutionally anything but what comes through out of their mouths, off their typewriters or their computers. I'm not one of those people. I'm a fan. I'm a story junkie, and I'm a fan, and because I'm a fan, I'm able to, I think, help foster people's strengths and bring out those strengths and protect them from their limitations, and hopefully do it invisibly, so that they have, at the end of it, have this thing that is better than they might have done had they done it alone. So I think I'm a pretty good player coach. That's what I think the job is. And then you have to manage also, network and studio expectations, and you're doing the same thing everywhere you turn. Somebody described it too as sort of running the Formula One race with someone throwing rocks at your head, and it's like that, especially the first year of a show.
Thanks very much.
See, there's another question in the room. There's one here on the Paddy. Could be a quick answer, even. After working on drama for years, would you like to write a sitcom at some stage? I don't know where it's come from.
I wish I were funny.
It might be a proposition you might get after this this panel.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the Byron sitcom. Any other questions in the room? Anything else anybody's burning to ask Howard? It might be another 20 years. Alex, down the front here.
Do you think
let's just get you the mic. It won't be 1 second.
I can hear, I can repeat it.
It's just for the rest of the room. Sorry, yeah. Thank you.
Do you think,
Won't be 1 second. Could go anywhere, this.
I heard of McTaggart's lecture on earlier this week that Shane Smith was calling, it was a call to action to hand over the reins to the younger generation. There's been a lot of discussion about that, but in terms of bringing new voices in to tell new stories, how do you feel about that in drama? Is that what's required now? Would you like to see more?
Well, one of the great pleasures is finding. I'm so impressed by how much talent is out there. I mean, look at Aziz Ansari. I think Master of None. Particularly those last 2 episodes are brilliant. I mean, there are fantastic voices. The question is, what is a middle-aged guy who's been around for? I saw on the introduction said 25 years. I'm afraid it's been 30, which is.
Yeah. Time flies.
I think the answer is yeah. Duh. It's kind of course. I mean, but the question, but what do I have to teach that person? I'm not sure entirely. I think there's a fine line between handing the keys to the kingdom and giving a blank check to somebody who hasn't done it before. For me, my apprenticeship was, I couldn't have done it back then. That was just me. I learned so much. And I think everyone is in such a great hurry to go off and do their own thing. And I think that's actually, again, costly. When there are these people who come out full-blown, Lena Dunham, there was no stopping someone like that. She got it. It came at a time. For me, it was really an education, and I don't think I could have done what I did until then. So,
can I ask one thing? Just talk a little bit about you. I know you watch drama from all around the world, scripted from all around the world. Are there things on the UK scene that are influencing you? You've seen some of the people who've been featured in the festival. What have you?
This is a very funny question because you asked me that and I answered. I said Happy Valley is it was something I flipped out about, and Peter said, full disclosure, my wife is the star of the show.
Sorry about that.
But I didn't know that.
Moving on.
But,
yeah. No, what is it? So, what is it about the writing or the texture of that of Sally's writing and that storytelling?
Well, I mean, it's just so it is. Look, it hit the mark that we all are trying to hit, which is to find out what it means to be alive and find stories that illuminate some essential truth, emotional truth, and do it compellingly, and that show just blew my mind.
And is there something about the just thinking about UK drama about it didn't cost a lot of money relative to some of the things you work on, high concept? Is there something about simple, straightforward?
Well, I think also the authorship. Like, in a way, it's less noisy. The authorship. I mean, you have Neil Cross doing Luther. I mean, these shows have such strong authorship. They're smaller orders, and I think more manageable in that sense. But I love.
Yeah, and there's something simple, direct. Yeah,
you guys are very good at this.
Yeah, we are. Just as well, given your portfolio, we're going to be good at something. There's got to be something left. There's another question, I think, back here. Forgive me, just can see it in the light. Thank you. Probably one last question. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask very quickly about your writing partnership with Alex. To what degree do you write every word together or rewrite each other? It'd be great to hear a bit more.
Alex and I split up after, briefly, the history of our friendship and our partnership was that we split up on X-Files. Alex wanted to write novels and movies. He was less enamored with television as a medium at the time, and less, even a show about aliens. He goes, I don't get this show. And he went on, and I said, well, I like it, I'm gonna stay. And 15 years passed before. And that's where, by the 5th year of 24, I said, Alex, come on. Alex was writing, he was in pilot limbo, writing the same pilot every year. It was another version of Northern Exposure, I swear. It was, this guy goes up, goes north, that guy goes south, this guy goes east, the country goes to the city. And I said, Alex, they've done the fucking show. It's called Northern Exposure. Come on to 24. And Alex famously said, I'm not a thriller. I can't write thrillers. And I said, Alex, you're so smart. And now he's, I think, one of the probably most sought after thriller writers in Hollywood. Yeah. But he said no in the 5th year. In the 7th year, when he frankly, by then had burned a few bridges and needed the money. Finally, I got him at his wallet. And so he joined me for the last 2 years. And we wrote some episodes together, but mostly by then I was running the show. He wrote a few episodes by himself. 24 Homeland we wrote together, and the first couple of episodes we co-wrote, and then and then we wrote the second. So the answer is sometimes you're right. The last thing we wrote together was the first season of series 2 of episodes, season 2. But I miss it, and we talk about it. We've actually now said, there's again, it's one of those things where we get very, very nostalgic about that partnership, which is, I've had wonderful collaborations with people, but Alex is probably the person who, it's like a Venn diagram, and we disagree on kind of only about 4 or 5% of the things, and so it's we sort of,
special.
We'll see what happens next.
A special relationship like this one. Thank you. Please don't leave it another 20 years.
All right. Thank you for having me.
It's been great to spend time with Howard Gordon. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.